David, thank you so much for joining us. To start off with, can you just talk a bit about what your impression was when you first got the script?
I read the script. I loved it. I did not realize Eurovision was a real thing yet. And then I called in and said, look, I think it's really great. We should just come up with a different title. This is a terrible title, Eurovision. And they were like, well, legally, we can't really change the title name because that's the name of the real contest. And it was like discovering the dark web. You're like, oh my God, a world of people and fanaticism and excitement. And it took me a little bit to get my head around what it was. But what blew me away was this idea that, after World War II, there was a need for people to feel connected and for the European continent to feel involved in something together that wasn't going to carry any of the shame or the pain of what had just happened. Getting the tone around your head as an American is crazy. I mean, it took me months to understand, like, oh, this is funny, but funny good. This is funny bad in a good way. They are just like, it's more like it's Coachella and somebody gets to win Coachella. You know what I mean? Like everybody's psyched that they get to go play Coachella. You know what I mean? Like, so I got into it. I started to understand it. Two things really occurred to me immediately. Number one, from a production standpoint, I was a little bit shocked because I was like, in America, we don't have 20,000 people at a live concert that is also a television show competition. Like those two things combining is very weird. So all of a sudden I started to panic a little bit and I realized very quickly, and I went to Netflix and I said, we need to go shoot the real Eurovision in Tel Aviv in like 4 weeks because we can't recreate this. We don't have the money to do this. That was number one. The second thing that really occurred to me and was very funny was that the music still had to be great. I don't want to make a parody of something that people love. So I went to Max Martin and Savan Koteka, these Swedish Svengali guru songwriters, who knew Eurovision and grew up with Eurovision.
How did you navigate the concern that it might become too insular? Because it does such a great job of like fan service to the Eurovision fan base, but also is obviously such just a big, warm movie that anybody can come to and connect to. So was that like a process, or were you just like, we can reference what we can, but like, let's keep the characters grounded?
It was a process of like, what does Americans need to know? What do they not need to know? Here, look, one of the gifts, by the way, that I got when going to make the movie was that Netflix wanted to make the movie for the European market. But they were really like, oh, we have 200 million people that watch this event in Europe. They only had at that time 140 million people worldwide. So there was a huge audience to capture, and this was a possible draw. There's so many singing competitions that Americans just adapted. I mean, there was zero confusion on the first preview in America. I mean, the movie tested much higher in America than it did in London even,
What was the process of securing the cameos in the movie?
It took a while. People were really thinking it was going to be a joke. They didn't understand. I mean, it was a campaign. I had to individually like call managers, and management always makes things 10 times more complicated than the artist does. I mean, they were like, Conchita's not singing with another person, and they want their own verse, and Netta wants a scene in the movie as well. But once we got the first couple on, then it started to snowball. It was amazing because there were things that were not ironed out yet. Like Conchita singing with Elena was not, I was told no. But once I got there, they were talking in the parking lot. I was like, oh my God, you guys, like, I said, I'm going to walk you through it, but I always wanted to hear your voices together and da-da-da. And they were like, oh, of course, of course.
In a way, like what you describe is almost like they brought the Eurovision culture to the filming of the movie, because that is very much backstage for these artists. They're competing on stage, but they're all like very friendly with each other.
Our premiere for the movie was supposed to be, at the next Eurovision. It was going to be the Saturday night finals, and then Sunday night was going to be our premiere, and we were going to bring the people who won and all of the people from the Eurovision thing. Lars and Sigrid, Scooter Braun was going to sign them to management. They were going to be signed to a record label for real. So we were going to treat the entire release as if they were real guests, and they were going to go on all the talk shows as the musical guests, as Lars and Sigrid, and then sit down and do interviews as them.
And I just want to follow up on one of the cameos, because obviously one of them was Loreen, who won this year.
And it was so crazy for me. And by the way, I adore her. And she's just, as a person, a powerhouse. That's somebody you walk in. By the way, when she came in the room, it's interesting. Like, some people command a certain reverence. They revere her. Her performance from the year she won the first time was like a classic. She was, fire. She was so passionate. And for her to come back and win again, I was like, this is impossible. And by the way, of course, now I understand how nerdy that is.
Something very striking about the movie, I think, is how much music is in it and how much music is actually doing the work of storytelling in it. So how did you navigate that?
I'm a commercial and music video director at Ridley Scott's company since '96. So, and I remember he produced my first movie, and he said something to me once where I had in a rough cut, I had a song in that wasn't a great song yet, but it was just a placeholder. He's like, there's very few things as a filmmaker that you have control over at the end of the day. Great music, you have the choice. Half of what they're experiencing is the emotional impact of the immediacy that music brings. So when I went into this thing, it was interesting. We had a bunch of people demo songs for it. And a lot of people came back with parody songs. They were kind of jokes, you hit my itch, or like whatever, and they were funny, but I realized they weren't going to stand up to the storytelling requirements of what the show is. And because Will's so silly, you kind of want the music to be really good. And the first thing that Savin played for us was Double Trouble. And I was like, oh, I love it. I love it. He was like, well, if you hadn't, we're writing some music for Ariana right now. We were going to change it into an Ariana song. I'm like, no, I want it. But like, you could tell they were writing to write music. You know what I mean? They weren't trying to write a Eurovision song. At the end of the movie, we come to Husavik, which was a song. It was very funny because at the time, I had scouted all these places in Iceland to figure out where to set it. And I had my heart set on Husavik, but production was like, we're not sending you there. It's too expensive. It's too far away. I'm like, well, I already started writing the song and I'm using the word Husavik in the title. And they're like, well, then change it to Grenjavik. I'm like, it's not going to be Grenjavik. It's going to be Husavik. But, it was a song that had to emotionally capture what she was about. It had to address their relationship. It's something that only a musical movie can do, is give you somebody singing a song to another person. I wrote it for you. Like, that's what movie musical moments for me. My whole life I've dreamed of having a moment like that in a movie. And so we worked on that song a lot. There's 17 drafts of, like, some of these songs were, honestly, Double Trouble never changed. There was a production pass and that was it. And I'm glad that you said that about how the music works. And I hate to bitch about this. In the Oscars and in awards competitions, it's supposed to be how the music is used to propel the story forward. Not it's on the end credits and we all love the song, okay? And that's what 4 of the other 5 were. By the way, that whole piece of music that's during the voting section at the end, which is Sigaros.
Yeah.
That was a temp piece that nobody could beat. And my music people were like, you're not using the whole piece. Are you using the whole piece? Like, it's a 6-minute. So the band heard it, and one of the guys was like, can I clean it up for you? And he glued it in there. Man, I don't know what he did. It's magic, Like, so even that to me is, and by the way, my composer's from Iceland, In the very beginning, 5 minutes into the movie, he said, can I run to the bathroom for a second? He left. And I'm like, okay, that was weird. And he came back and he was like, I got very emotional. He goes, how do you know about the ham and the beer? And I'm like, what, in 1974? And I'm like, I was told that when I was scouting Iceland. Well, somebody told me that there was an embargo. You couldn't get ham or beer. He's like, oh, yeah, there was a huge embargo. He goes, but during Eurovision in Husavik, those fishermen would bring in the ham and the beer. And for Eurovision, like we would all break the rules for this one competition. And he's like, it's so emotional that you took the time to get it right.
Right.
Well, I think totally. It's like Iceland didn't feel like they were made fun of. Eurovision fans didn't feel like they were made fun of. I'm curious about some of those choices because it's, whether it obviously the hamster wheel is a real thing from Eurovision, but like even the staging of these numbers, that's really where you get to really dig in with the fun that is Eurovision.
Comedy to me is the overcommitment to the absurd. That's what Eurovision does so brilliantly. Like those people are never winking. They don't. Which is why also I got, they were like, oh, your bad guy is gay and he's going to have a pronoun joke. My gay friends were all, I played it for them. They were like, dude, this is fine. I'm telling you, it's fine. No one's going to be upset. We're going to run it in the preview. I'm not pulling it. And if somebody has a complaint, we will then deal with it because I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. Like, obviously, these comics are all being so defensive about what they can say, what they can't say. It's like, you can make a trans joke without hurting trans feelings. That's fucking bullshit. You're just lazy. You just want to be able to do it the way you fucking always did it, Dave Chappelle. And I get it. I love Dave Chappelle. But when you're not representing people fully, then you have a problem. The truth for me that I loved about Lemtov is he's the bad guy because he's the antagonist because he's going to break him up. He's right about everything he tells her. He's ignoring you. You have a great voice. You should be somebody else.
Right.
He's actually the voice of reason. He's a good guy.
I mean, casting Dan Stevens in that character, I feel like was such an interesting move, right?
I said, you remember the guy that was like the gorgeous guy that died in Downton Abbey? He's like, oh yeah. I'm like, I think he'd be funny as Lemtov. He's like, oh yeah. I think as an actor, he was wary of like where this guy sat. It's based on a real Russian performer. I mean, in Russia, there's no gay people in Russia. So he has this whole thing that they based it on this guy that is this crazy flamboyant dude who has pictures with, Putin, and he's like looked at as this big pop star, and you're like, he's super gay and super really awesome. Will was like, I just think the most manly man in the world is my dad, and he's ashamed of me. I was like, that's just terrible. And he's like, I think it's Pierce Brosnan, like the best looking man in the world. Like, and I was like, okay, let's go get him. I'm like, he's only 15 years older than you, but we'll figure this out.
Yeah.
Well, I have to say that there's something about that plot line, that part of this like tonal balance that you really struck. Particularly, I mean, people talk about the sort of like opening. Lars's mother has just died, right? And him seeing the ABBA performance, finding a sense of home that he had lost in this competition, but then also immediately Pierce Brosnan off to the side. It's just like, Eurovision, I'd rather kill myself or something like that.
Yeah. It's such a strange scene to open on, and at the same time, it sets up everything. It's interesting. I tried to adjust it. I tried to change it. I was like, what else do I need to see here? And it was just so efficient and so kind of silly in a way, but also kind of like you got it. And Pierce, it's funny. He's such a nice guy. He just did not want to be mean to the kid or mean to Will. We needed them to be broken, and there's like this question of like Lars and his stunted growth and his, how is he going to ever change? And by the way, he's never going to be change unless he has his father's approval, and he's also not going to have his father's approval unless he takes a risk. So those things are just all built in there, and it's the three of them in that room, and it ends up being the three of them at the end, and it's a very efficient story in that way. I really that relationship, and having lost his mother and then having a parent that doesn't understand you is very, very complicated, and to have to pursue a dream in the face of someone telling you that you're wasting your time. And what I realized in this movie when I first got that 89-page draft and I sat down with Will, I was like, well, it's really their relationship. Like what the movie's really about the two of them. And he goes, well, maybe she's writing music and he doesn't know it. And I'm like, there you go. Rachel's my secret weapon in the movie. Before we cast her, I said to Will, I'm like, you can put her opposite anyone and you will believe the love story. And The minute you see the two of them together, you're like, oh, I get it. And she was able to find someone who was innocent enough, sweet enough, simple enough, make you believe it enough. I mean, look, this is ridiculous. They've been together for like 20 years and they've never touched each other. You know, like what she does at the Elf House. I mean, by the way, talk about another 2 minutes of exposition that sets up like a whole fucking story. I mean, it's kind of, they're terrible cheats. You don't want to do that in a movie if you don't have to. But if you have someone like that and all of a sudden you're like, okay, she's going to load it up. She's magic.
Speaking of Rachel McAdams, want to go back to that Husavik moment at the end, because there's something, just in the context of this Eurovision podcast, is that like this idea of like representing your country or representing home, or that sits alongside this like this real sense of broader community, right? Like, and there's something in that moment where like both ideas are encapsulated, right? Like it's like the song that represents her hometown, and yet like so much of what that ending is, it is about finding a broader home or a broader sense of community. So can you talk about like kind of how you navigated that?
I remember being like, Will, I think the whole third act you should be in it. I think you should get on that stage in your yellow thing. And he's like, okay, it's kind of crazy. I'm like, dude, we're kind of beyond that. You know what I mean? It's Eurovision. But the fact that it all came together like that, and it feels like a Eurovision song, we didn't cheat at the end, right? And that it's about my hometown. It's about like, we're here on this stage, but what I really love is being back there with you. By the way, it's the most romantic thing you could think of. It's so anti-patriarchy. The woman is singing to you to give up on your fucking shit.
And I also think it's so amplified, especially in regards to what Eurovision is and represents. I remember we showed someone a video and they were going, they're waving the wrong flag. Did they like run out of money or something? And I was like, no, that's Eurovision. People root for everyone. And I think it's so beautiful there. Both tells this story of home from a perspective that an American who doesn't know the competition can understand.
I love what you just said. Here's the thing. I don't think we get home as Americans. I think we're actually very fucking conflicted about it. We left home. Everyone who is here walked away from something, or we went through the trauma of someone in our family having to or wanting to something, but we all walked away from home. Europe is still there. I think that what's so special about Eurovision is it is about home. It is about your country. It's not in a we're better space, but it's in a, look how sophisticated what we're talking about is. But that's something that the movie gave me the opportunity to do as a director. There's these reasons we come together and we gather for these things. And out of the wreckage of World War II, which was so fucked up, the fact that they invited Germany, the fact that they invited Italy, everybody was allowed to come and be clean again and start over. Dude, Americans aren't that smart. We don't get this yet. We're in the adolescence right now. That's why we're dealing with authoritarian insanity. Right. They've been through it, but they're on alert. In Germany, they know how to teach about the Holocaust. We can't teach about slavery. We're trying to hide it, dude. Are you kidding? This is fucked up.
Actually, like one of the early German entries, I think, into Eurovision was actually just a song about needing to face the aftermath of the Nazi regime 15 years after the end of World War II, when that number was like broadcast on television. And you're just like, compared to like here, where like 200 years, like, we can't come to terms with any of that. And it's so funny today. Like, it's like all these conversations about Twitter and stuff like that. And it's like, oh, well, we're losing our public square and like blah, 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 blah. And yet here, like, there's actually one where it doesn't devolve into people, having like food fights on the internet. And it's like kind of amazing.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And by the way, they do talk about politics and they talk about ridiculous shit. It just goes to show you how insular our worlds are, that I didn't know anything about this 3 years ago. And, when Will was like, this is bigger than the Super Bowl, I was like, what are you talking about?
That's the line I always use.
What you're talking about.
Yeah.
And then you look at the numbers and you're like, oh, this is crazy.
But is there a world where a sequel is something we might see?
We've talked about it. I hope so. We'll see. Netflix is they're incredibly cagey. Too bad because Netflix had Eurovision broadcast rights for the 2 years after the movie as well. So
Right.
if we had had that premiere and the roll-in, I think we could have had a different thing in America with Eurovision.
I mean, just sort of off of that, talking about the Oscar performance. And
that was beautiful.
We really put that together with Molly singing and getting her to Husavik. And by the way, this town of Husavik put it together. If you go to Iceland, every school in Iceland sings this song now.
It's
Really?
amazing.
And when you go to Husavik, the quotes are painted around the town. And the first Eurovision museum in the world has opened up in Husavik. It's a wonderful, amazing, weird thing that's happened.
It's also Iceland was such the perfect choice, but I don't think there's any country that has a higher percentage of people watching Eurovision. I think like, no broadcaster in the US would ever talk about having over like 90% of the population watching.
I know
one
that.
show.
Yeah, watching
the
something.
country stops literally for Eurovision.
Well, and also there's that thing where it's like because Iceland has never won, right? But the year the movie came out, the expectation
they
was
would have won.
100%.
Yeah.
Cody, whatever that guy's name was.
Yeah, Dottie Fryer, right?
Yeah.
Dottie.
Yeah, Dottie Fryer.
He got ripped off.
Yeah.
By the way, the funniest thing was when he started re-recording the songs from Husavik.
I was going to ask
He started to
if you had heard
re-record
the
them
Ya
and
Ya
put
Ding
them up
Dong
because,
cover.
yeah.
I love that it kind of played out what happened in the movie, because I think he was like, all of you have been asking me to do Ya Ya Ding Dong. Fine, okay, fine, I'll do it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for taking the
By the way,
time.
what a lovely. You guys are really smart. You know the movie really well.
Yeah, I mean it's really remarkable how you guys really hit the bullseye on that. So thank you so much for taking the time.
All the mysteries of the Euroverse.